Hello, friends, and happy 4th of July. This is a very makeshift setup. I'm actually sitting here on the grass with all of the chairs set up for the fireworks tonight. And I am in Williamsburg, which is the most patriotic place to be. My dad and I actually just did a carriage ride, and it was very fun. And I actually was kind of questioning whether I should go live today. I started this practice of going live every day last Monday. And so I've been doing this for almost 2 weeks, and I've learned a lot since going live. And so, for those of you who have tuned in thus far, we've had conversations with other people called the Knowing Conversations, and also conversations specifically around serving blue collar industries for the Craft and Calling podcast. And so I've actually been learning a lot about just production in general and about best practices. I've started with the Knowing podcast last year, and we're, I guess, 20 plus episodes in at this point. Actually, I think we're hitting 20 episodes next Tuesday with the 6th episode release on season 2 of the Knowing podcast. So I've just been learning a lot about production, about creating content, and it's just been a really good habit for me to set up here and not have it be perfect, because the Knowing podcast honestly is something, and has been something, that I wanted it to be perfect, and the team working with me is just absolutely wonderful. I'm so grateful for wonderful humans. See, it's clearly not perfect. I've got the hair blowing in my face. But this going live every single day has been a very good challenge to not let perfection get in the way of progress. And that is something that I actually heard. I was working with a team, our partners with Amazon, a couple years ago, and that was a recurring theme: don't let perfection get in the way of progress. And ever since then, that's something that I've really kind of taken to heart, because I do allow perfection to get in the way. And at the end of the day, at the heart of perfection is actually fear of rejection if it's not perfectly curated and if it's perfectly within my control. And so, with that desire to squelch fear and fear of rejection, I have been going live. And so, with this imperfect setup today, I'm sure that the audio is not great. I ran over my AirPods with my car. And so we're just going for it. So here we are today. I actually felt very led to talk about something particular. And that is specifically talking about just the beauty that is knowing self. And Viktor Frankl, for those of you who saw the description, he had just this really beautiful quote in Man's Search for Meaning. He said, "Everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way." And so, for those of you who don't know Viktor Frankl, he authored this book called Man's Search for Meaning, and a lot of this book was chronicled during his time in Auschwitz and different camps during the Holocaust. And his perspective, his ability to lose everything — he lost his wife, he lost everything except for the one thing that truly is what allows for human freedom, which is choice. We get to choose our attitude. We get to choose the lens through which we view the world. And y'all, this power, this freedom, is one that ultimately we get to celebrate today. Yes, this is something that, we're celebrating freedom in America, but there's also another element that every person in the entire world gets to celebrate: this freedom of choice, this freedom to choose. And there's something about the first step of realizing that we have that choice, which is awakening. And this concept of waking up to the world is something that I didn't know anything about until I finally allowed myself to — it felt almost like coming out of a daze. And I talk about this concept of waking up. I've talked about it in my book, and I've talked about it on various social posts. And y'all, this concept of waking up is something that I first experienced when my brother-in-law was killed by a drunk driver. And it almost was like the very first opportunity that I was given to arouse from this stasis that was the status quo, how I was raised, how everyone else around me acted, operated, behaved, looked, talked. And so it's really the first time that I was given the opportunity: am I going to choose to face pain? And a lot of time, choices is that's kind of our first opportunity. Am I going to stare down pain? Am I going to awaken from the stupor that I've been in? And so that was my first real kind of reckoning with brokenness, which I did not choose to awaken at that time. I had a second reckoning, and that was when my husband, my former husband, first said that he was thinking about leaving, and didn't allow myself to wake up at that time either. I just realized with the first reckoning with brokenness, I chose to focus on my sister who lost her husband and my 3-week-old baby niece. She lost her daddy at 3 weeks old. And so for whatever reason, whether it's warranted or not, whatever reason we afford ourselves to not choose to awaken when pain confronts us, we're still making a choice. Whether it's to put our head down, close our eyes, and grin and just wait for the pain to pass us by, or whether we're going to choose to open our eyes and confront the pain. And it's not just pain that is external, an external loss, but there's also the pain of confronting with the person in the mirror when we choose to look at ourselves in the mirror. And, we have this opportunity to say, but I'm so fixated on everyone else, how wonderful I'm living my life because I'm so, I'm sacrificing everything for everyone around. Well, that's such a devastating, it's a devastating deception because it keeps us from assuming responsibility to activate choice and assume agency over our own lives to say, okay, well, how will I live? And so the third reckoning with brokenness that really allowed for me to really wake up has been actually leaving. And it was at that time where I lost control, the very thing that I had worked so hard to preserve and protect, that I was holding, I was forced to let go of because marriage is something that requires two people. And in so letting go, I just realized, okay, like I don't have total control of my life. I cannot choose. I can only choose for me. And so in recognizing that choice is solely personal, and that is ultimately what it means to assume radical responsibility for our lives, is to assume radical choice. How am I going to live for me? And I can't control anybody else. And so in that question of how then will I live, we must go inward and we must do a self-audit to assess, okay, who am I today, in order to then say, how do I want to live? How do I want to live tomorrow? And what change do I need to make in order to live accordingly? When I was 30, so almost 2 years ago, when I turned 30 for my 30th birthday, because my birthday's at the end of the month, I wrote my eulogy. And I wrote down, what do I want people to say about me at the end of my life? And this exercise was incredibly potent because what it did was that it forced me to reconcile, how am I living today? Am I living today in alignment with being able to have those things said about me and have those things be true? And what that allowed for those of you who are just joining, I'm talking about when I wrote my eulogy when I turned 30. Y'all, what this allowed for was being able to say, okay, what beliefs do I hold right now that are informing my behaviors? And if there's disparity between who I say I want to be and who I am today, I either need to change a belief or I need to change a behavior. And so I actually found that there were some real behaviors that I needed to change. For example, I wrote in my eulogy that I wanted to be well-traveled and well-cultured. And that's allowed for me I did a 3-week trip to the UK after that. And then I did a 3-week trip to Greece and Italy. And then I did a 6-week trip to France and Italy just a couple weeks ago. And so that really, that ideal that I identified, okay, I do want to be well-cultured. I want to, and now granted, those are just traveling still in the Western world, so I recognize that. But what it did do was that it brought my ideal under the limelight and forced me to analyze, is there a behavior or a belief that I need to change to ensure that I'm living in accordance with my ideal, and that I'm living my life in a way now where every single decision I'm making today, I'm making it with intention to ensure that at the end of my life, I'm proud of the way that I lived. It's too late at the end of our lives to change anything. And so we have all the power now. Choice allows for change. If we're not proactive in identifying what do we want, we're not going to be able to identify what choices need to be made today to allow for the change to then reach our ideal. So if we think about Viktor Frankl, going back to a quote from him in this book, A Man's Search for Meaning, he said, in between stimulus and response is choice. So if the response, the change, let's say, allows for us to get to our ideal, then we need to really be analyzing kind of like everything that happens after the stimulus. And y'all, we need to be analyzing our stimulus itself. What are the stimulants in our lives? Our stimulants are our inputs in alignment to allow for us to make the right choice to then ensure that our response is putting us on the right trajectory towards our ideal. And so, let me go to kind of backtrack to what I initially wanted to talk to you about today. And so much of this about choice, we get to choose in so many ways how we show up to the world. We get to choose the manner in which we engage with who God made, and that is ourselves. And y'all, if we want to be a good steward of what is given to us, we first need to start with. And y'all, I cannot tell you how much this change that I've made over the last 3 years of switching my focus and control to everyone around me to, okay, I can control me and I can change my choices to allow for real change to ensure that I'm living in accordance with my ideal and aligning my life accordingly. There has been now radical change on the horizontal. So a core concept that I have come upon in this time of really going inward is vertical alignment versus horizontal alignment. I lived so much of my life horizontally aligned, looking to the right and to the left. I liken it to a compass, where my compass was oriented east and west rather than pointed north. And I was so fixated on everyone around me. Who do you want me to be? And also, what do you want? So I can orient myself and my life and bend whichever way, makeshift myself so that you're happy. But in so doing, I'm effectively seeking to control their outcome and who they are, rather than being able to really ensure that I'm living vertical first and in alignment with who was I created to be in the first place. And so I effectively had to strip away all external, everything horizontal, all those distractions to allow for me to go inward and just have the quiet and really align with, okay, well, who am I to begin with? And so what I wanted to talk about today were just kind of 3 steps that I had to take, and that I did take, and some exercises that really helped me to do so, to allow for me to assume this choice that has empowered me to live more in alignment, live vertical, live with my compass pointing north. So first, I really needed to remember. And y'all, there's something so wonderful about remembering, because I was just, so I'm, for those of you who are just joining live, I'm sitting here in Williamsburg on the grass, and all the chairs are lined up behind me for the fireworks. And I saw this grandpa playing with his grandson, and the kid was just giggling. And I was sitting with my parents, and we were all just like watching, and we were laughing. And it was just the most precious, pure thing, watching this little kid just erupting with laughter and saying again and again. And y'all, there's something about us today remembering that part of us, because that part of us was pure, unadulterated. My mom actually made a comment about this last week. She was like, we need to just protect these people, their souls, because that's a part of like the purity of who they are, their nature. And then as we grow up, our nurture impacts us, our community, our everything external begins to shape and mold and craft who we are. And we tend to kind of move further and further away from our nature, who we were intrinsically, innately to be. And so the more work we do today in adulthood to remember, to look back and recall who were we in childhood, it allows for us to bring those parts of us kind of back to present day. So the first exercise, which incorporates this concept of remember, I actually talked about this in episode 8 on the Knowing podcast. So I'll go ahead and drop that link here in a little bit. But I actually interviewed one of my clients at the Knowing agency. His name's Paul Sheasley, and he has been a client of ours for about 5 years. He's an executive therapist, performance coach, absolutely brilliant, studied at Harvard. And he was talking about an exercise that he encourages his clients to do in order to help them remember. And it was something I had never done until this point. And he said, pull out a picture and just look at it. And so I have a picture right now actually in my mind's eye, and it's one that is purely ridiculous, and actually a picture that I have felt embarrassed about, from the horizontal perspective, right? It's this picture of me. I'm probably maybe almost 5, and I'm wearing clown hair, I'm wearing a safety vest, so it's orange and yellow, and then my clown hair is red. And I have a painting palette because my dad and our family history has a painting business going back to 1922. So I have pretty sure I have winter gloves on my feet. And I think in the other hand, I have like a baseball bat. And I just could not look more ridiculous. But when I think about that picture and I look at the little me with bright blue eyes, I have this very, very fierce expression on my face. I just loved playing. And so I would encourage each one of you, as I've done, and it's really been so deeply meaningful to me, because what I do in so looking at this picture is that it changes our expression from one that is judgment and one that is kind of harsh and shameful of that little child, and it just allows so much endearment. It's like looking now I look at this picture of me and I'm like, oh my gosh, I really loved play and I really loved dress up, and I did not give two shits about what anyone thought. And what a blessing that is, and how I want to live that way now. Like so since looking at some of these pictures and kind of returning to like, oh, who was I? I've started wearing bows again, and I've started wearing skirts and just being super feminine, and it's so fun and so freeing. And when I start being worried about what people will think, that's when I know my alignment is going horizontal and my compass isn't pointing north anymore. And so, for those of you who are just joining, I'm talking about some exercises that have really made a difference and helped me in my own journey of knowing. And this first exercise that I'm talking about is under the guise of remembering who we were as children, who we were innately made to be, the purity of our nature, and this concept of going back and looking at a picture from childhood, and then after we look at that picture, write down some verbs and adjectives about who we are. So being able to look at that picture and be like, she is so playful, she is so fun, she is ridiculous, she doesn't care what people think, she's free. And y'all, the goal, a major goal, is freedom. So this 4th of July day, main reason I think why I'm led to talk about this is because the goal is freedom. And that freedom is predicated in our ability to choose. Who am I going to be? What's my attitude? How am I going to show up to the world? And so this choice is really helpful for us to go back and remember, well, who was I innately made to be? Because otherwise it's so easy for us to lose who we are in relation to looking to everyone around us, looking to even church held up for an avatars of saying this is the ideal, be this person. But the more we can remember as children and to our nature, the more we'll be able to identify those characteristics and those traits become the ideal, because when I am, usually that is where freedom lies. Peter, I just saw your note. It's good to hear before heading out to work. Thank you, my friend. Peter on Instagram, appreciate you. The second is, so first we need to remember who we were innately created to be. The second, becoming a caretaker. Y'all, we have to move into this role of caretaker, because as I said, for those of you who are just joining, I was talking about how when I would look back at pictures of me in childhood, I would feel a lot of judgment and kind of shame that little girl because she was wearing silly clothes, or honestly not acting in accordance with what. When I look back with love, I see how much joy. And y'all, I think one of the best indicators of whether we are living free is play. Am I free without judgment? And y'all, we have to become the caretakers of our own souls, because otherwise we will be looking at ourselves and that's fundamentally putting a lid on the vulnerability of play. We're sitting there being the judge and jury over this part of us that is so childlike. There's a reason why Jesus in the biblical text says, like, they're the ones who will inherit the kingdom of God. And there is something very true, so incredibly profoundly true of statement. What would it look like if you were to exist in freedom? What would it look like if you were to return to the childhood where you stopped worrying about everyone around you and you existed in the vulnerable play that is derived from acting and being like a kid? What does freedom look like for you? And only you can answer that. Although this is the next exercise. I'm skipping one that I had here for moving to the role of from the role of judge to the role of caretaker. I'm going to skip that one exercise for maybe another day. But the third thing, where we have to look in the past, and then we have to move into this role of caretaker and really allow for this part of us that has felt judgment and shame from other people and also ourselves. We have to move to the role of caretaker. And finally, we need to look in the mirror. How does the past show up in the present? So, but and in both good and bad ways, right? So how does but we'll talk about the past of that vulnerability, that play. How does that show up today? And so at the Knowing we had every attendee send out this message, and I'm going to drop it in the little bit at the end of this, but I had everyone send out this message to those closest to them that they really trusted and honored their opinion, because y'all, this is part of our self-audit. It is our work, our job to go inward and know who we are, but it's also really helpful to ask those around us for assistance in this self-audit. So for those of you who are just joining on LinkedIn, Facebook and Instagram and YouTube, I am sharing just a quick exercise that I had folks send out when we were at the Knowing Retreat. And this is an exercise that helps us see and know how we show up in health when we're doing well in life, when we're doing well emotionally, spiritually, mentally, physically. How do we engage with other people? So here's the prompt. I am examining how often I show up in relationships from a place of emotional health and safety. I'm texting a few people, but first, what I mean health and safety. I am meeting my own emotional needs. I am operating from a place fully aligned with who I am uniquely. I am not coming from a place of lack. I am not looking to you to meet my needs. I am whole alone, and you and others close to me are simply an addition to my life. So here are the two questions, and if you don't mind helping me with this, I would so appreciate it. What behaviors or temperaments show up when I'm acting from a place of this health and safety? For example, am I goofy? Am I easygoing? Am I motivated? Second, what percentage of the time do you believe I act from this place? Y'all, this is incredibly important that we ask people, what percentage of the time do you honestly think I'm acting from this place of health and safety? And so just to continue on with, I'll go first. This is what my younger sister, said to me. So this question of what behaviors or temperaments show up when I'm acting from a place of health and safety. She said, you laugh really hard, you tell secrets, you share what's on your mind. I think when you don't feel centered, you get more contemplative or hesitant. And that was so good. That was such a good looking in the mirror, right? Because y'all, we have to look in the mirror. We have to look at our reflection. We have to do the work to face the truth. And we can do it ourselves, but so often relationships are the place where we really get to see the truth, who we are, and the things that need to change, which is so awkward and hard. And then she said, I think you've been showing up consistently the past few times I've interacted with you. So that's good. But she also knows that I ebb in and out of this place of emotional health. So y'all, this is where I want to leave today, is that we have the power. Hi, James. Good to see you, my friend. Y'all, we have the power of choice. And that is the ultimate freedom. And so on this 4th of July holiday, as we're celebrating and just remembering how much we have to be grateful for, may we remember that the greatest freedom is a universal freedom, not limited to those of us just celebrating in the US, but this gift of freedom, it resides in the power to choose the manner in which we engage with the world, the lens through which we view the world. And we have the choice to know and decide our beliefs, our behaviors, to then determine who do we want to be at the end of our lives, and are our choices living and propelling us forward to live in accordance with that. So thank you, my friends.